What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Hear Me Out podcast and Frank Analysis. And we have a very special segment with you guys with three very special guests. Returning to the show is Dennis Potvin and Israel S. Daly of Big Talk, Little Talk. And for the first time on the show, I have Pierce of the YouTube channel D Pierce SSC. So Pierce, you want to give everybody an introduction of who you are since this is your first time?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. You can find my YouTube channels at D Pierce SSC. That's mine. I also work very frequently with Dak Rouleau. Like and subscribe to his channel. We're trying to get him monetized. And yeah, I'm just out here talking about society, politics, and every once in a while other things that are interesting me on my channel. And I'm happy to be here today.
And Pierce will be back on Saturday for a one-on-one interview. So today, we are going to talk about an interesting topic that was brought up by Dennis the last time he was here. He suggested that Tulsi would find a lot of benefits if she joined the GOP. So Dennis, I will start with you so that you can elaborate on that suggestion you gave and why this would be beneficial. And then I'll throw it over to the other two guests.
Well, I think one thing that was made clear with this primary was that there's just not a lot of room for Tulsi Gabbard in this Democratic Party. Until this hierarchy is gone, whether they retire or voted out or pass away or however it happens, as long as you have the Pelosi's and Schumer's and Hillary's and Biden's, and now as we see Bernie, who was a sheepdog atop the party. Actually, Bernie did probably more than anyone other than the mainstream media to smother her campaign. I just don't think there's any room for her. So I had originally suggested that she go back to Hawaii and in 2022 run for governor. Yeah, I guess she could run as a Democrat because Democrats do well there. It's a blue state. And then maybe rebuild her career as governor for maybe a term and a half, and then maybe in 2028 come back and run for president again. She'd only be 45, 46 years old. But then the more I thought about it, I thought, maybe she should use the Ronald Reagan method. Ronald Reagan was kind of a B-movie star in the 50s, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't John Wayne or Henry Fonda or Jimmy Stewart. And then in the 50s, a New York wave of actors like Marlon Brando and Paul Newman and Jimmy Dean came along, Montgomery Clift, and so he certainly didn't have any room there either. So his career was kind of waning. So he decided to dabble in politics, and he actually became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which is, we can just assume is the most liberal union in the country, right? So he was a Democrat. He was running as president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he saw that in politics in 1960, there wasn't any room for him there either because, of course, the Kennedy family took power in 1960. So in 1962, he did what I call the switcheroo of 62. He actually became a conservative all of a sudden. And then in 64, he endorsed Barry Goldwater running against LBJ. And he reinvented himself as this conservative Republican all of a sudden. He ran for governor of California and won. And then he ran for president a couple times. And of course, 1980, he won that too. So Ronald Reagan made a transition from being a Democrat to being a Republican and found a great deal of success because he found that his name recognition really helped him in the Republican Party. Tulsi has a similar situation. She's actually well-liked by Republicans. She's extremely well-liked in conservative media. We saw her on all the Fox shows, Fox Business and Hannity and Ingram and Tucker throughout the campaign. So she's already got a foot in the door there. Trump shows her nothing but respect. Even when he calls her by the wrong name, he still is usually saying positive things about her. And in my opinion, if she made the switch after this election's over, if she said, I'm going to run for governor of Hawaii as a Republican, I think she would be elevated immediately to one of the most popular Republican politicians in the country. Now, I'm not saying she would ever do this. I don't think she would, but that's what I would like to see her do.
Yeah, we're just speaking hypothetically here. We're not saying that this is likely. We're just saying whether this would be a good idea for her or not. So Israel, do you have any thoughts to what Dennis just said?
Well, I just want to add on to what Dennis said. Republicans love it when a Democrat switches over to the GOP. They will jump on that as a PR strategy, as a marketing. They'll put it on every billboard, on everything, saying, look at this. We've gotten another Democrat to switch over because the Democratic Party is suffocating voices like Tulsi Gabbard. And I just want to say, I was one of the first of the progressive wing of political commentary to talk about this, to open that discussion about bridging the gaps, because there's a lot of Republicans who are anti-establishment. We see Sauger and Jetty on the Hills of Rising being sort of a figure that, you know, people see all the time from the progressive side, who are showing progressives that there's room there for an anti-establishment, more socially conservative figure such as Tulsi Gabbard to open the door even further and expose Republicans to a positive message, something that progressives and new style Republicans can get behind. And even some of the far-right figures are sympathetic, empathetic to Tulsi Gabbard's anti-interventionist, protectionist message on foreign policy. And that's something that can really galvanize folks. Now, as far as how likely it is for Tulsi Gabbard to do this or not, it'll depend on what the climate looks like in the near future. I mean, look at what's going on with Pelosi and Trump right now, that partisanship that's happening there. It's impossible for any politician on the right or the left to get exposure to good ideas. Tulsi Gabbard has been holding nonstop town hall meetings that are public to everybody, that everybody could tune into about the coronavirus, but everyone's hyper-focused on this Pelosi-Trump dynamic. So I think I agree with, Dennis's ultimate theory here, or thesis, that it's kind of unlikely. I don't know if it'll happen. I'm definitely one of the cheerleaders out there hoping that, Gabbard makes the move. But not only Gabbard, other progressives should look into this. Let's look at how the Democratic Party has rigged and really suffocated progressive voices. They're frustrated, they're exhausted. So why not, co-opt the next best party, the one that has a better chance, who's less involved in the rigging. They don't have superdelegates to the extent the Democrats do. And they're open to, accepting whatever the voice of the Republican Party, the voters decide. Look at Trump. Nobody in the establishment Republican Party wanted Trump, but they all lined up behind him because they're more willing to capitulate to their grassroots than the Democrats are.
All right. And Pierce, what are your thoughts to what Dennis and Israel just said?
Yeah, so Dennis, by alluding to history, he's trying to tell us that it has precedent that in the past people have switched parties and found some kind of success in the American political system. So I think that precedent's important. It shows that it can be done again. So I think that that's really smart to bring up. I agree with what both Dennis and Israel said, where there's basically no room for Tulsi Gabbard in this form of the Democratic Party. To the extent that any politician who is anti-war can co-opt either of the two corporate parties, both of those parties being, the problem. They're both the problem. But to the extent that any anti-war candidate can co-opt either side and possibly win the presidency, that's only going to help America. I mean, one of the key theses of Tulsi Gabbard's campaign was that, you're trying to get health care. You want all these good things to happen in your nation. Well, you can't get it because we're wasting tax dollars abroad, our money, bombing brown people like abroad, and it doesn't make any sense. And just to finish up, I think that Tulsi Gabbard should not have endorsed Joe Biden. I don't care if she promised. I think that was a huge, bummer for her brand. And she shouldn't have even associated anything of herself with Joe Biden. I agree with Dennis in the sort of sense that Bernie had played a sheepdog-like role, kind of pushed progressives to this, which is unfortunate.
Is anybody getting that feedback?
Yeah. Could you repeat that last part?
Yeah, that must have been something weird. The last thing that I said was she shouldn't have endorsed Biden, and I just kind of think that she shouldn't associate her brand with the Democratic Party or Biden. And I think it's unfortunate that she has to work within such a corrupt system. I mean, I see both parties these days as like two corporations. Neither one are competing for visions of who's going to make America better, and like they're not using competition to hone in that strategy of making America better. Both parties, both corporations, are mostly just interested in holding power and maintaining the status quo, and it's unfortunate. So we have to talk about how Tulsi Gabbard is definitely slightly better than Bernie Sanders, even though both of them endorsed Joe Biden. But at least Tulsi Gabbard isn't out there vote shaming her supporters and voters. And I actually still have a soft spot in my heart for her, where it's like I kind of given up hope on some of the people that I've looked up to in terms of like progressive leftist politics, like Bernie Sanders and Yang and Marianne Williamson and Chomsky and Tulsi have all disappointed me. But if Tulsi Gabbard wants to come back and be a better version of herself in 4 years, that'd be great.
Yeah, that segues me into the next question that I had for you guys, and that when Tulsi made that decision, some people were like, "Oh, see, this confirms what I was saying, and that we can't trust Tulsi." Like people like Anna Kasparian of TYT, other people who supported Tulsi ended up burning their shirts, their Tulsi shirts, like Primo Nutmeg, or they were like, "That's it, we're done with her. Like she's not a real progressive." So, do you think there's still people that have that understood why she did that and stuck by her, and then there's other people that rationalized her decision or understood her and were understanding after she endorsed Biden, and what do you think progressives will do if they see her join the GOP? Do you think some of them will say like, "Oh, see, we can't trust her. She was a Republican the whole time"? Would people who supported Tulsi stop supporting her if she joins the GOP? What are your thoughts on that, starting with Dennis?
I don't think her supporters will abandon her, because a great deal of her supporters were independents. They were disaffected Democrats like me, who did not get behind Bernie Sanders, but who believed in progressive ideas. And of course, Republicans, like my parents. My parents have voted Republican since 1968, but they both supported Tulsi Gabbard up in Michigan. So I don't think she would lose a lot of her base. I think they'd be with her, and they could all understand why she did it. You got to remember that for Republicans, there are three key issues, and that's immigration, abortion, and guns. Those are the three big issues that are important to Republicans. And if Tulsi Gabbard aligns with them for the most part, which she does, in fact, Meghan McCain even said it on The View. The last thing she said to her was, "Hey, thanks for not wanting to take my guns." But in addition to that, when you hear what she said to Dave Rubin, when she went on his show, that she believes that abortions should be rare, safe, available, but rare, and she is against third trimester abortion. That puts her in line with most Republicans. There's been a lot of legislation like we had here in Tennessee about the 5-month limit. And then on immigration, she's actually very strong on immigration. She believes we should have closed borders. She's one of the ones who did not raise her hand, as did so many of them, for giving free college and health care to illegal immigrants. She was like, "I'm not raising my hand for that." So since she aligns with Republicans so closely on those three issues, she's going to be able to push single-payer health care. There's nobody on the Republican side, as long as she's with them on those three key issues. And on top of that, she's actually a very religious woman. They like that about her. So if she comes out and says, "Look, I believe we need to have 2 years free university for all students. I believe that we should have a single-payer healthcare system," Republicans will go along with that. They're not opposed to that. They're not opposed to the message. They're opposed to the messengers. Mm-hmm. They're opposed to Nancy Pelosi. They're opposed to Hillary Clinton. They're opposed to Bernie Sanders. But if that message comes across from Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know if you remember this, but when she was on Dave Rubin's show, he asked her point blank about reparations. You all remember that? Mm-hmm. And she actually said, "I believe we should look into it." Now, if it was anybody else, Dave Rubin would have laid into them and gone full scorched debate. But because she said it rationally and she explained why we should look into it and see if it's feasible, see if it's something we need to do, Dave Rubin said, "Yeah, okay." So if you can get Dave Rubin to agree with you on such a hot button issue, because he knows you agree with him on those 3 key issues, she could do that across the country.
Yeah, Israel, do you agree with Dennis's take?
Yeah, for the most part. I also want to say that, the folks like Anna Kasparian and the kind of the TYT and company folks, they were always against Gabbard. So none of the people who followed, TYT or who were part of like the extreme Bernie Sanders fan base, they had already canceled her the minute she stepped in the race. Mm-hmm. So she never really galvanized much of the support there. A lot of it was kind of from the real anti-war, anti-interventionist groups in the progressive wing who care about that kind of stuff, civil liberties, and that aligns very well with kind of a lot of right-wing voters. The only kind of pushback I can see is actually from the more evangelical right, just because of that religion issue. But I think that they see her as a person who respects that. So I don't know even there how much contention there might be. Maybe the liberal wing of the Democratic Party might try to smear her further, kind of the Hillary, Knights and all of that. So that liberal wing of the establishment Democrats might make every effort to kind of, try to defame her more than she's already been defamed. But look at what's going on right now in the progressive wing. They're eating each other. So they're too busy eating each other. Tulsi Gabbard should step away from that, disassociate herself from that. The Bernie Bros are chomping away at Chomsky. The folks who lean further left are too worried about like the figures who are trying to pander to them and tearing them down, that I don't think that she really even needs those folks, to be honest with you. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. If she can court some of them, that's great. That's great if she can court some of them. But, yeah, I think in this kind of strategy, she should lead the way in opening that door for progressives and saying, look, just because you have an R or a D doesn't mean you can't be progressive, It also doesn't mean you can't be conservative. You can be conservative and be like a hardcore liberal. You can be progressive and be a hardcore Republican or conservative, so it's just a matter of how she does it. I think the strategy, the PR, and, how she can't just kind of the next day, like a switch, be a Republican. It has to be a transition. She also has to start calling out the people, and this has been a criticism of me, even though I've been a really huge supporter of Tulsi Gabbard, my channel has always backed her. Call out Pelosi. Call her out with the vigor that you call out Trump, being Saudi Arabia's, bitch. Call out Pelosi in the same way with corporate dollars, with corporate influence on the Democratic side, pharmaceuticals. If you start doing that, I think you open yourself up to really get the embracement of Republican voters.
All right, Pierce, what's your take?
I'll add to that as well that Pelosi and Schumer, you can also hit them on being, Saudi's bitch and being, mostly stooges for the Israeli government when it comes to foreign policy. One of the things that I left out in my last statement, I kind of got distracted, but it was like I wanted to bring up how Israel brought up how important PR is. I mean, extremely important in American politics in the sort of sense where there's a certain kind of cosplay, kind of theater type element to American politics because we're so infantile in our understanding of how to make society better that we only can understand it through a lens of an America that is so focused on celebrity, which is unfortunate, but you have to play the game, I guess. So that's another reason why I think that the endorsement was a mistake for Tulsi Gabbard. If she were to make this hypothetical turn, her supporting Joe Biden is not going to help her with Republicans. Joe Biden representing a form of neoliberalism that needs to die a death sooner rather than later. On the issue of abortion, guns, and religion, I mean, the religion part of America, you have to play that game, cosplay that as well as you can, but let's just be quite honest, it's kind of, I get that it's very important to a lot of people, so I don't want to offend anyone, but it in the political sphere is just, it kind of shows you how infantile we are with our understanding of American politics. I think you should be able to have as many guns and abortions as you want. Leave people alone. Stop trying to restrict other people's freedoms. And these labels are confusing. We talk about like Republicans, conservatives, leftists, progressives, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to like, America is not going to get better until we push for an anti-war candidate that frees up some of, like, most of what America does, most of its policy is foreign. We're not doing a lot right now in our nation for people. We have kind of corporate oligarchs that are managing this system that we call a democracy, and it keeps us all in line in social control. And we watch TV for 2 years, and then we vote at the end of those 2 years, and we keep doing that. And that it's been found to be sustainable. So the American oligarchs really improve on the process. But if you want to get Americans healthcare and reparations, if America ever succeeded in reparations, that would be the biggest turnaround in history. Especially for a nation that has wide scale effects for the species when it comes to the most powerful nation on earth doing good as opposed to doing shit. I mean, there is a possibility here where for the human species, we're not just talking about nations right now, but America kind of sets the tone, and there's a possibility that we can have a better country. All we have to do is stop doing the war shit, and that's probably one of the reasons why, just to bounce off Dennis, is we were talking about what we were talking about offline, but it's kind of one of the reasons why I like Tulsi Gabbard more than Bernie Sanders, because she understands the logistics, manpower, resources, supplies, food, equipment, so much goes into foreign policy. The bases, they're practically like small countries in and of themselves when you think about how the standard of living in some bases just differs so drastically from the poor people that base might be, slightly aggressive to abroad. So that's my piece. To the extent that Tulsi Gabbard wants to keep her anti-war crouch stance, whether she does it in the Democratic Party or Republican Party, I'm all for whatever PR strategies get her there in this hypothetical. But yeah, it does have to be understood in the kind of very facile understanding that Americans have about politics, vis-a-vis the three issues that we brought up: abortion, guns, and religion. Those seem fairly straightforward to me. Let's get to the real issues. Let's talk about, war, healthcare, education. I mean, the government doesn't have to do so much, but let's start with being good on those three, for a start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do want to bring up how the Republican Party is still in bed with the corporations, much like how the Democratic Party is. So I also want to bring up Ron Paul and how the GOP did everything in their power to try to stop him. So do you think that Tulsi will face the same obstacles if she were to run as a Republican? Dennis, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Republican Party knows that they have to rebuild themselves for the future, because in 10 years we're not going to be talking about Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell being in power. We're going to have a whole new set of players, and like we talked about, Sagar and Jetty represents this populist movement on the Republican side, and that may be the way they reinvent themselves in the post-Trump era. So you might have the Ben Sasses of the world, or like Marco Rubio has kind of reinvented himself, and then you add Tulsi Gabbard into that mix, Nikki Haley. You're going to create a younger, more energetic group of Republican lawmakers who could really storm across the country, especially if the Democrats are still in this death grip of corporations and war like they are right now, and if they don't get rid of the people atop of their party. So I just think that the GOP, and I can't remember who brought it up, but the day that Tulsi Gabbard, and I agree with you, this shouldn't be an overnight thing. She should start on Twitter and talk about, I'm going to run for governor of Hawaii. I'm facing some opposition from the Democratic Party. The more I look at my campaign, the more, kind of tell a story over the course of weeks and months for the next year and a half. And we can all see in real time how it transitions to the other party, and everybody will understand why she's doing it, because she's slowly telling us why she's doing it. And we'll agree with her. And like Israel brought up, yeah, she's going to lose some of the independent media who gave 90% of their love to Bernie Sanders and 7% to Tulsi and 3% to Yang. We're going to take all the Young Turks and Kyle Kalinskis and even Jimmy Dore until probably this year. He was still shining Bernie's shoes. I know he's attacking him hard now, but he didn't do that 2019. He was still shining Bernie's shoes all of last year. He just this year switched to supporting Tulsi.
A sheep following the sheep herder.
Yeah, right. And I think as he was getting closer and Tulsi repeatedly came on to his show, he could see what was going on with Bernie. And I think he transitioned to Tulsi. He just thought she had a better future with the movement. But the fact is, all of these shows on independent media who gave 90% of their love to Bernie Sanders, okay, now who's going to get the love next time? Because Bernie's going to be gone. At least, for God's sakes, I hope he is. He's going to be gone. So who are they going to give that love to? They weren't giving it to Tulsi Gabbard. Young Turks gave her none. Anna and Emma did nothing but attack her the entire campaign. So what she loses from the Young Turks crowd, she's going to gain it from the Fox crowd tenfold. Fox is still far and away the most viewed program in the country. So I would very eagerly exchange liberal independent media for the Fox News crowd by switching to Republican. And I mean, let's just admit it. They just have a better apparatus to get elected right now. They have since 2010.
Israel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't want to make this like a whole love fest, so I'll push back a little bit because the Republican Party is still corporate. Mm-hmm. If you think the Democratic Party is the corporate lovebird, then the Republican Party is, the long, steady wife that they've had for a long time. The Republican Party has always gone to bat for corporations, big money interests. So let's not get that twisted. And they still uphold that kind of credos. They still uphold that kind of agenda. Trump is just kind of the new face, the kind of whisper in the wind of like maybe the Republicans should, listen to that whisper in the wind and become populist. But let's not get it twisted. The Republican Party is still heavily corporatized. The Mitch McConnells and those figures that we never talk about on, in the media, the ones that never make it to the surface of the national discussion, that underbelly, that's still there on the Democratic side and the Republican side. On Tulsi Gabbard, though, I think she's coming from a perspective of, look, I've established myself as a Democratic figure. Let's not forget, as much as Dennis was mentioning how, the Jimmy Dores, they were the following the sheep herder this whole time. I mean, for God's sakes, Jimmy Dore was part of TYT. Let's not forget that. So he doesn't go without blame here. He contributed to that. Well, Tulsi Gabbard was also contributing to the establishment. Why? Because she was the queen. She was the princess ready to be crowned the queen of the new DNC as chairwoman, They took her under her wing. And the minute she pushed back a little bit, because she was probably still willing to play some ball, she just didn't like the direction that it was going in. And so immediately they dropped her. And I think that soured her and really made her wake up. So I'm grateful for that. But I think that should also be the nuance that we add to the discussion is that, all of these figures are all politicians. They're still part of that big, swamp pool that they play in. It's just you shouldn't cancel everybody. And the one, the flowers in the swamp, you should still try to nourish them and help them realize where to go, where the American people want them to go. And so I think that, that's just a little bit of nuance that I would contribute. It's just we should all be aware of that.
All right, let's hear from you, Pierce.
Yeah, and I think that's nuance, but it also opens up the conversation. I'll try to close it back in a little bit by saying, this is why you believe in ideas, not people. People that you like are going to occasionally disappoint you. I don't really want to talk about personalities, but just a point of interest. If anyone's interested in economics and finance and how COVID is changing society in ways that people aren't paying attention to, but are actually extremely interesting. I think Jimmy Dore and his buddy Dylan Radigan are providing some of the most sober analysis I've seen when it comes to kind of seeing where our society goes post-COVID. So, these people still play a role, but yeah, I would just much rather stick with ideas that I find fundamentally important rather than discussing the personalities so much. To get to what I was going to say, though, absolutely, Dennis, the GOP does need to rebuild. I actually might talk about this on my channel. That's such an interesting idea in the sort of sense where, you also said, Dennis, that the electoral system with the Republicans in their primary is better. Again, all these things that can be leveraged to get an anti-war position in the presidential office for the United States of America is important. And absolutely, it's when it comes to the Democrats' superdelegate kind of system versus the Republican system, you have to take all of the advantages that you can possibly get. So that is a good reason why Tulsi Gabbard should join the GOP, because if it makes it even marginally more possible that she could become the nominee and lead to a better, not just nation, but a better world, because war it's just the most terrible thing for the species, then more power to her. Please go in that direction. I do disagree with you, Dennis, in the sort of sense where you're saying that she has to tell a story. I mean, lives are at stake here. Like, do it as soon as possible. Start telling that story right now and get ready for 2024. I think that the news cycle is so fast and schizophrenic, and the narrative control is so strong in America that you can tell that story very quickly. You can tell it in the next presidential election. So just a small point of disagreement there. But I will also double push back to Israel. My man Israel was saying that the GOP is corporate. Let's remember that Tulsi Gabbard, again, not to get too much into the personalities, Tulsi Gabbard is great because of the war thing. And, we have to keep our ideas, keep pushing those ideas. And to the extent that politicians support good ideas, I support those politicians. And finally, I will close by saying, I guess to finish that. So, Israel was saying that the GOP is still corporate, but, the double pushback there is that Dennis said that she has a better chance in the GOP system. So, they're both corporate, but see which one you can finagle to usher in a better world. I mean, we're at this point in the United States, you have to kind of take advantage of the weaknesses in both corporations and both parties in order to try to make positive change. Because if you just leave the two major parties to their own accord, they're not going to usher in any positive change. Finally, I'll just say how Tulsi could change the GOP. Along with her ideas, there are some pretty toxic ideas on both sides. Both parties are corporate. And in the GOP, if Tulsi Gabbard were to become a candidate, if she could stop Americans' frenzy from seeing themselves as victims of the Chinese and victims of the Russians, that would be a double win for me. Push for an anti-war stance, but I also think that Tulsi, coming from where she's coming from, if she was accepted into that Fox News GOP apparatus, she could work as a figure that it tells people, hey, the government doesn't have to do a lot, just UBI, healthcare, education, stop wars. And that's what conservatives and libertarians like, right? Small government. Well, let's make the government only do those 4 things. Israel brought up earlier in the conversation how important PR is. It's how you sell these things. It's so important, and I think that should be part of the story that Dennis is talking about. Go out there and tell people the government doesn't really have to do a lot of things, and just name the 5 most important things that you can think of that can make better, positive change, not only for Americans, but for the species as a whole. And, that's what I have to say.
I really like hearing all these perspectives and ideas interacting with each other.
Frank.
Yeah.
So I'm going to push back on Israel as well. We know Israel loves playing devil's advocate. You and I, we've made him pay many times for advocating for the devil, right?
Mm-hmm. I got something to push back on too, so go ahead.
Okay. Here's the difference between the corporate GOP and the corporate Democratic Party. Trump was able to still destroy the corporate GOP party because, like Pierce said, they don't have superdelegates. They aren't in control of the entire liberal media and most of the print media as well.
Trump seemed pretty involved in his administration.
What's that?
They seem pretty involved in his administration to the level of destroying them.
Talking about what got him elected, though, in 2016. He went on stage with 16 other Republicans, and he destroyed them. And he got airtime, and he got news time. What the Democrats can do to you is when Tulsi goes up and destroys somebody like Kamala Harris, or like or Tim Ryan, or like she attempted to do with Warren, what did they do? They cut the commercial before she could do it. See, they didn't cut the commercial when Trump was going after people. They didn't black her out. They didn't have another candidate like Bernie Sanders lying to the American people repeatedly on national television saying, we're down to 2 candidates now, me and Joe, and every one of these $30,000 a day news anchors like George Stephanopoulos and Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd all went, yep, we're down to 2. Not one of them called him out for that lie. If Donald Trump had said that, if he had said, well, it's just down to me and Ted Cruz, and Rubio was still in the race, they'd have said, oh, well, hold on. Marco Rubio's still in the race. So there were many things that happened in the GOP primary that did not happen in the Democratic primary. That Tulsi could get smothered, Trump did not. The media did not smother Trump. In fact, they elevated Trump. And maybe it was the whole Pied Piper theory. But
you mean billionaire businessman Trump? The American worker champion?
Yeah.
Real estate mogul.
That's why they voted for him.
So
Here's the other
Israel,
thing I forgot
this
was, let's not forget, Tulsi voted present for the impeachment vote. I think the best thing that Donald Trump could do when he wins on November 4th is on November 5th name her as ambassador to the United Nations and pull her into the party right then and there.
so
I think that would be obviously he likes her, he respects her.
so Israel,
And
this
would be the start of her new career.
This next question is very related to what Dennis just said, and he brought up the mainstream media. So do you think that they will attack her harder as well? And it's not just mainstream, but independent YouTube media, popular independent YouTube media. How do you think they're going to react to her decision? Do you think that media, whether it's mainstream or independent, do you think that they'll be attacking her even harder than they were already doing so in 2020?
Right.
Probably, but I just want to say to Dennis's point, I don't disagree with most of what he said. I just think that, sometimes in attacking liberals and Democrats, we do these apologetic gymnastics for the opposition. These guys they're holding a gun to the back of your head just as much as the liberals and Democrats are. And as soon as you're able to take the gun away from the liberals, they are willing to pull the trigger on you. Don't get that twisted. If tomorrow it's all progressives and sunshine and Tulsi Gabbard's in the House and in the Senate, they'll still have that gun on you and they'll still want to use it because there is some disagreement there. But I will say, look, if Trump were to do decisions like that, I mean, he praised Tulsi Gabbard, even though Kelsey, right? Kelsey 2024. But yeah, I think that would be great. But as far as like new media and everything like that, yeah, I think they would ramp up the attacks on her. If anything, you'll see like more victory laps from the Anna Kasparians and people like that saying, "Oh, I'm so right. I'm always calling these," even though my entire network is embarrassed by the Russiagate situation and what's happening with Flynn. We're not going to do segments on that. We're just going to make sure hopefully that goes away. But as soon as something like that happens, I think they will ramp up like, "Oh, Gabbard switched over to the Republican Party. Who could have seen that coming?" Very kind of sarcastic. You know how progressives are. They love to throw that at you like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think she should care about that. Look at Trump. He had the entire liberal media establishment against him. That only helps him. There's no such thing as bad PR. Progressives need to understand that. Bernie Sanders and his tippy toes and all the progressive caucus and their tippy toes. Oh, my God, guys, let's put out this memo. Make sure that all the Bernie surrogates, we don't say anything bad about Biden because, they're going to use that against us and all. No PR is bad PR. And that's something the Republican media establishment, the Republican Party, they understand very, very well. After all, Dennis, they come from the business world. They come from corporate. So they understand marketing and PR.
Right. Yeah, and Tulsi shouldn't care what they say about her because none of them are behind her anyway, other than Jimmy Dore. He was about the only one. So who cares what they say? Because now, if you run as a Republican, oh my God, you can open up the floodgates. You can say everything you should have said about Bernie Sanders. And I told you guys before in a previous show, the mistake Tulsi Gabbard made, in my opinion, she made some good ones. I agree that she should not have done the 5-minute video on March 19th where she said, "I support Vice President Biden." I wish she just hadn't even put that video out because it seems to have lost her some support. Even though everything she had done for the previous year was what we wanted, that one 5-minute video, and let's not forget, she's done absolutely nothing since then. Unlike Bernie Sanders, who's like the Uber driver for the Biden campaign right now. She hasn't done anything since. But Tulsi basically had to do it. She did it. It's over. But on November 5th, when Trump wins re-election, she can just open it up and let them have it. She can talk about every problem about the Trump-Sanders campaign. She can talk about Pelosi, talk even more about Hillary. Go scorch earth on the Democratic Party, and you will make the Republicans adore you. They already like her. Now they'll adore her. And who gives a damn what independent media? One thing we learned from this election, guys, independent media had zero influence over this election. They have done nothing. Hill Rising has done nothing but bash Joe Biden for 8 months straight.
And his numbers are going up.
He's winning 70% of every state right now.
Yeah, it doesn't. The Tara Reid story actually helped him.
Or Katie Halper, they created this whole sex scandal against him. Did nothing.
I had a pushback. I had
So-
to push back on Pierce.
Can I jump in?
I had to push back on Pierce.
we'll get back to you, Israel. Let's hear from Pierce because he hasn't spoken in a while.
Just very quickly, we have to remember the reasons why people voted for Trump. It's not because they're all ignorant ingrates. And one of the things about like the Democratic Party is that they constantly put the blame on the voters. They talk about how ignorant GOP Trump supporters are, but they don't take account of their own failings in the liberal kind of elite Democratic circle. I am by no means a conservative or Republican. In fact, I like to style myself as a strong leftist, an anti-war leftist. And when it comes to this version of the Democratic Party, you know, I kind of agree with what Israel's saying, where it's like they have the gun pointed to your head, and when the Democrats are not defending you from the gun pointed to your head, the GOP is not afraid to shoot you, the American people. But I would counter just saying that the Democratic Party, their lack of providing a coherent and strong contrast to the GOP, it kind of sets the left and right bounds. It makes the left what the Democratic Party is, which is a fairly conservative centrist party, and it makes what the Republicans are doing more normalized. So the Pelosi and Schumer types, they make ideas like giving everyone health care and education without putting them in debt seem crazy socialists. I mean, we have to remember we have to remember that post-World War II, there was a huge Red Scare in this country that we're still living with. We still have, like, you know, it's more the arguments of our parents, and hopefully the youth doesn't argue in these terms, but we're still arguing about socialism and communism while we see that our nation, like the workers, are losing out, and we're just getting in more and more wars, and it's complete nonsense. It's super goofy. I'll paraphrase a quote by Hunter S. Thompson from his book Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail in 1972. He says something where it's like the Democratic Party is an atavistic endeavor, and that it is more a vehicle, it is more an obstacle rather than a vehicle for change, and that there can be no positive change in America until the Democratic Party, in the form that we know it now, is done and away with. He said that in 1972, and we're basically still in this form of Democratic Party neoliberalism that I don't think we've outlived, that Hunter S. Thompson was living during his time when he was covering for Rolling Stone. By the way, shout out to Matt Taibbi. I like that guy. And yeah, when it comes to the new media, I will close by saying that absolutely we don't have an effect on electoral politics. Israel, him and I were talking about the role that media should be playing, and when it comes to like galvanizing support for electoral politics in America, I feel like that's maybe should take a secondary or tertiary goal. I think it's more important to just keep spreading these ideas because, yeah, we're not having an effect, and I don't think that the goal should be, I mean, I think it's just more a long-term goal than people think, and people don't want to hear that. People want to hear that their favorite candidate, a Bernie, a Tulsi, a Yang, is going to get in this year, but there are electoral dynamics to consider. And I think that one of the things that new media can serve is, you know, I think we're all doing the right thing right now. Keep talking to people online because old media is totally dying, and we need to keep talking to each other and tell people unplug from the fucking matrix and keep sharing these ideas. Remember, all we have to talk about is if Tulsi Gabbard were to make some kind of shift to Republican, I mean, you only need a society, a government to do a few things well. It doesn't have to do so much like what the current government is doing, and what the much that the government is doing right now isn't helping much of anyone except corporations. So yeah, that's my piece on kind of everything.
So I got to counter two of your points there, Pierre. So for one, in 1972, the Democrats ran the most progressive at the moment, McGovern, and he got swept away by Nixon. In fact, and Dennis will remember this, there was a whole thing about Democrats for Nixon at that time. So if I'm not mistaken, that was around the time. So if he's talking about that with someone as progressive as McGovern was, who kind of emulates a lot of Bernie's ideas, and he got mocked, then what I don't see how that makes your point.
I think we should table this discussion because there were certain complexities about the 1972 election. I mean, I very recently reread Fear and Loathing in the Campaign Trail 72. Like, I can see the point that you're saying, but I don't agree with the framing already in the sort of sense where it's like McGovern was we live in a very conservative country, and, you know, McGovern was painted as a crazy socialist. This is kind of the dynamic that I'm discussing where...
And but that adds to my second counter to you, which is that the gun thing that I was saying is that you know, Why do you think that right-wing media right now is trying to connect AOC and Pelosi? Oh, they're two peas in a pot. Oh, all these lefty media outlets, the Doors and all of them, they're the same as Pelosi because they know how to set the framework. They're geniuses at that. As soon as they wipe out the liberals and the Democrats, they know that the AOCs, the Rashida Tlaibs, the Jayapals, and whoever comes after that, like Dennis was saying, who's going to fill in Bernie Sanders' shoes, say they become the majority, the framework's already laid down. The railroad tracks have already been laid down with their right-wing media to convince conservatives and the Republican voters, two peas in a pot. Oh, this is just the new Pelosi. Sure, he's talking about these lefty ideas that Pierce and Franco love now, and they're all about it, but this new Democratic Party is no different because they're great at that. They're great at laying down the foundation and connecting those two. So that's what I'm saying is that PR and marketing is so important, and distinguishing yourself from that. That's the key within that battle between liberals and progressives, or however you want to explain that dynamic. As far as like candidates and personalities, I'm sorry, that's politics. You said it yourself. Americans are infantile in their understanding. So you think that is it going to be like an 100-year strategy where we start educating the American people who work 40, 50, 60 hours a week? How do we even begin to do that? Politicians are a vehicle, and they attach themselves with policies that a lot of people who are in the philosophical arena, maybe they like. So they need to learn how to take their wins and say, okay, Trump, non-interventionalism, good. He's going to get me somewhere there. So I'm going to back Trump because I know he's going to be better on anti-interventionalism than the rest of the crew. So as a philosophical person who's anti-regime change, who's anti-interventionalism in other countries and bombings and all this, I'm going to take my win where I can find it from the philosophical perspective and hope that he's a vehicle that drives the conversation about that. That's the thing. You cannot separate personalities with policy. You just can't do it. Someone has to drive the vehicle of the policies, and that's where politics and electoral, the electoral spectrum, that's where it kind of fits in. So that's all I will say. I just wanted to get my 2 cents in.
Yeah, I agree that corporate media is bad, and I wish that Donald Trump was like that form of anti-interventionist. Like, I would have voted for him if he was just like, hey, we're going to pull out of all these nations that we don't need to be in. I'll just close by reiterating, like, the fact that the Democratic Party cannot provide a strong contrast to the GOP is what makes them so conservative. I do agree with you, though, Israel, where, PR is just so important because we live in like a culture that understands things from a like celebrity worship mindset, and we're a very corporate media environment. Corporate media is just so powerful, and to the extent that we're moving to a society where it's more about independent and small media and people talking to each other, I'm for that society, because if we keep up with a society where corporate media controls the narrative matrix that all of our fellow Americans are kind of asleep in that system, that's a worse nation. So I see some indicators that people are getting away from corporate media, and I hope that those keep pouring out as time progresses. So that's what I was alluding to by the fact that our role in independent media is spreading good memes, especially to the youth. And if it's not going to happen next year, then Israel, you said it when we spoke. Sometimes you got to work for the ages, right? But the point is having the right workflow, the right conversations, and if we're the start of it and positive change is only going to come in 100 years, then I will sleep in my grave very soundly knowing that maybe we started this stuff.
Agreed.
Okay, so we had a very great discussion here. I do want to let you guys give your final thoughts, but also use this time to give your final thoughts to also mention if you think that there's a better alternative than for Tulsi to join the GOP. So let's start with you, Dennis.
Well, I just want to end by saying I'm hearing a lot of folks in independent media like Crystal Ball say now that she's finally realizing this is the end of the burning movement, she's finally saying, and I almost spit out my Coca-Cola listening, that I don't know if you've heard her last couple of days, she's doing some kind of a self-therapy on the air where she's saying, it's really got to be about ideas. We really can't put everything about one person. This is a commentator who for 9 months, 4 segments a day, has name dropped Bernie Sanders' name like she's got some kind of crazy daddy complex with him. She's been doing that for 9 straight months, calling him out in every segment. She did a segment about Disney World closing and talked about Bernie Sanders in it. You know, obviously got a real problem. She needs hypnosis or something. And
she's a sick woman.
The last 2 days, she's thinking, well, we really need to be about ideas. But I'm going to tell you something, fellas. Every team needs a quarterback. And you can have the best playbook in the world, but you need a leader on the team. So I'm not buying that, well, we just need an idea, but we need like union organizers, or we need people in yellow vests. You got to have a leader of the movement. The movement begins with the first follower, and then the other followers join, but you have to have the leader. And right now, the progressive movement does not have a better leader than Tulsi Gabbard. She's the one who can pull the widest array of people who aren't just concerned with social justice BS like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is or Nancy Pelosi is. She's the one who actually talks about real ideas like ending wars, like single-payer health, and that's what you need. You need that leader for us to follow, and that's what she represented for so many of us. And I don't care if she does it in the Democratic Party, the Green Party, or the Republican Party. It doesn't matter to me because, yes, she has the ideas that I like ending wars, and she's a leader. So she represents both. She's got the best ideas, and she's a great leader.
Israel?
Yeah, I agree with most of what Dennis said there. And, about the crystal ball thing, I have noticed that. And, I'm glad that, better late than never, as they say. Yeah. But we can help her through that process, that grieving process.
Yeah.
Look, Tulsi Gabbard, I think she's a great candidate. She has her flaws. And you gotta pick the leaders that you think best represent the policies. As far as the Bernie Sanders thing, I've always said on my channel, I'm not canceling anybody. Sure, Bernie Sanders is making some terrible moves right now, terrible decisions. The man brought in a lot of people to the political world. So even though Jimmy Dore and all those folks want to tell you, nobody's voting for Bernie, everyone's abandoned the Bernie shit. No, the man's got a lot of emails. He knew how to capitalize on it. And those people who were apolitical or didn't know much about the political world, they don't always watch Jimmy Dore. Sorry, Jimmy. They're not all watching you, So there is going to be a faction of that Bernie coalition, the Our Revolution folks, who are going to be, following their sheep herder, if you will. So, it's not conducive to the future to just completely call them names or you must be dumb or whatever if you're following this person. Recruitment is what the mentality needs to switch for progressives. They're in chaos mode. I don't know how to help them. They're a bunch of babies. Sorry. But yeah, that's why I think the GOP, transitioning folks over there, I think is probably more conducive. The Green Party, I hate to say it, they've had 60, 70 years to get on all the ballots. They're still not on all the ballots. You could play the game of they're rigging it and all of this. They have some structural issues. The Libertarian Party's like a clock. They function like a clock. On every single ballot, they have their crazies, they have their problems, but they're on every single ballot. They're also fond of Tulsi Gabbard. So like Dennis said, I don't care what party she ends up being in. If there's somebody from the philosophical world too, some genius book writer who says, you know what, I'm going to take a page from Reagan. I'm in this space. There's a lot of call for like idea people, and I have the charisma and the personality. I'd welcome that. Yes, please join up. But understand marketing, understand business tactics, and understand PR. Because we live in a conservative world. We live in a pro-capitalist. Sorry, socialists. Sorry, comrades. It's a pro-capitalist world. The protests aren't happening for a general strike. The protests aren't happening for, and I'm sure they are. Look, I don't want to say they're not because I'll get ringed in the comments. They are happening. Go ahead, Dennis.
Elwood hasn't rallied everybody out for general strikes?
No, right. Graham Elwood, I don't know.
You're not going to quit your job and go strike because Graham Elwood told you so?
I don't want to get the conversation so focused on like these personalities. I was going to say this for my last word, but I will give my last word. But right now I'll just quickly interject that the Hill Rising, Secular Talk, Jimmy Dore, they're not corporate media. They're not perfect, but at least they're not having the shitty conversations that corporate media is having. I hope that, if you're a Fox News watcher, a MSNBC, CNN watcher, start with those channels. These people have their faults just like every other person, but don't believe in people, believe in your ideas, because these people are going to disappoint you. I will give a final last word, but I wanted to interject there because I feel like you two are very focused on kind of giving critiques about these personalities, but don't focus on what they're doing. Focus on what we're doing. I think that's more important. I think the more people that are doing this, that can have its own outsized effect that, I'm sure Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kowinski, Sagar and Jetty, and Crystal Ball, they've kind of helped along the path. And, fuck them.
Oh,
I mean,
definitely.
not fuck them. Like, seriously, I wish you the best with your endeavor. Let's all work towards, whether it's, if we're on the team, Crystal Ball, at least in the sense where we're not corporate media, then, I hope that I'm welcomed in her space. I hope that, she's welcomed in mine. So I just think
I
we
agree
should
on that.
talk about
I don't want to demonize this. I don't want to demonize the strike movements either. I just think that a lot of people have been like criticizing the open the marketplace of people who've been protesting out there. So that was kind of my driving point. Go ahead.
I guess like if I were to have a closing statement, I think that I will kind of end this discussion with a kind of offline discussion that I was having a little bit with Franco, where we were talking about politics, the way that we understand it. It's not how to organize a society so that a nation can get as good as possible and, progress is made on the like human species front. When we think about politics, we think about Trump, Pelosi, Schumer, all these characters. Pick your poison. And then when we talk about media isn't about informing people. In fact, the current way that we understand media is this kind of omnipresent force in all of our lives that actively throws disinformation towards our fellow Americans under the guise of credibility because they have an easily recognizable brand when all four of us right now are working way harder than any of these people. And I think that we care about the nation more than these people. And so we have to really come to terms with the fact that, what is your role? Don't see your role as voting every 2 years after watching TV after the 2 years. I mean, I very much encourage, I'm going to say this for years. If I keep doing this YouTube channel, I'm going to say it as long as I have the YouTube channel. Keep talking to your fellow Americans. Get them unplugged from the matrix. Everybody that's listening to this, tell everybody that you know, stop listening to corporate media. Mm-hmm. Let's hash these discussions out, and let's talk about the fact that war, education, healthcare, and perhaps a UBI. We could probably have an interesting discussion about UBI, but I see that the government takes money and then kind of gives projects to its buddies. It's like, why doesn't it just give the money back to communities that are totally suffering? So just kind of an aside about UBI. But yeah, the government doesn't really have to do too much. And Tulsi Gabbard wanted to use that kind of PR framing. I think that could be successful for her. But to the extent that, she is pushing for good ideas, I support her. But anybody else, if you want to jump on the anti-war, pro-people, pro-family bandwagon, I'm a brother in arms, and just know that the corporate media isn't. The two parties, the two corporations are not. So, let's just work on contextualizing all these conversations. Don't focus so much on personality, but keep talking to your fellow Americans, people. So that's my last word. Just keep sharing, and let's break out of this matrix, all of us, as possible. That's the only way that progress is going to be made.
So I do got to say that this is one of the most interesting conversations I have had the pleasure of being a part of. I thank you all for joining me today. Tulsi Gabbard has a very long career ahead of her. She's not even 40 yet. So in 2024, if she does end up joining the GOP or the third party or whatever her career path is in the future, people can refer back to this conversation and see that we were the first people to talk about what her future decision could be, joining the GOP, third party, whatever it may be. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to Hear Me Out Podcast and Frank Analysis, and also to Big Talk, Little Talk with Israel. And it's D Pierce SSC for Pierce's channel. And follow Dennis on Twitter at Dennis Potvin Dem. Thank you guys so much, and have a great day. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.